Oblivious to her $300 million inheritance, her in-laws threw her and her triplets out after her husband thunder-chewed the Vermont sky, while rain hammered the windshield like nails. Nora Caldwell's sedan idled at the estate gates, trunk yawning, trash bags spilling clothes onto the gravel. Margaret Vance watched from the steps, umbrella tilted like judgment. Edward stood beside the movers, counting breaths, not boxes. Keys. Now, he said. The copper ring slid from Nora's palm, warm from fear and hours of pleading. Lily's fox backpack sagged in the rain. Owen hid a shoebox under his jacket. Sophie pressed a cracked lamb to her chest and stared at the porch light, as if it could forgive. The gate groaned shut behind them. The tires spit water. Lightning popped over the hills, turning clouds the color of bruises. In the glove box, an envelope. Daniel's handwriting stamped for a day that never came. Inside, a safety deposit stub. A number scrawled twice and a second note torn in half. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Thomas Reed, the friend who left 3 missed calls after the funeral. Each voicemail cut off at the same second. Why? She pressed the gas. The engine complained, then yielded. Burlington's lights wavered through sheets of rain. She tasted metal, or panic, or both. From behind, a toy car rolled, bumped her seat and settled. "Mommy," Lily whispered, "why is Grandma throwing our toys away?" Nora didn't answer. "Not tonight. Not here, please." She saw in the side mirror Margaret's face in a blur of storm, and something else, a gloved hand closing the mailbox at the road, where no mail was due at night. The red flag dropped. The yard light flickered. A shadow stepped off the curb and vanished into the rain. Nora's fingers tightened around the torn note. She had no idea what those numbers meant. What happened next will shock you. Rain clung to Vermont like a habit. Yet Nora Caldwell always pictured sunlight when she remembered the beginning. A thrift shop on Church Street, a second-hand snow globe with a tiny lighthouse, and Daniel's grin when their fingers reached it together. He asked if she collected omens. She said she trusted coffee more than fate. 2 cups later, they walked beside the lake, talking about budgets, broken toasters, and the kind of life that survives rough weather. Daniel liked plans that fit on a single page. He noticed small necessities, oiling door hinges before they squeaked, and refilling salt without being asked. Nora liked how he listened and how laughter landed as lightly as breath. They carried the globe home and placed it on the mantel. He tapped the glass every morning, so glitter drifted over the white tower. A private benediction. By winter they had merged closets and grocery lists, and believed patience would escort them through any storm. They married in May under lilacs that perfumed the church steps. Confetti stuck to damp shoes. The sky felt rinsed. Daniel's parents were gone. But Margaret and Edward Vance attended, elegant and remote. Margaret's pearls glowed like ice. Edward's handshake conveyed approval without warmth. They asked about property titles and beneficiaries between bites of cake, questions polished by long practice. Nora smiled, thanked them for the advice, and changed the subject to honeymoon maps that did not yet exist. On the drive back, Daniel squeezed her hand and promised that love would be louder than pedigree. He kept spreadsheets the way bakers weigh flour, steady and precise, turning columns into comfort. Weekends they painted trim, fixed a cabinet door, and listed goals that sounded wholesome rather than grand. Savings, good insurance, a pantry that stayed full. Triplets arrived sooner than expected. Small and fierce, named Lily, Owen, and Sophie. Bottles lined the counter, burp cloths draped chairs. Sleep came in careful fragments. Daniel drafted a whiteboard rhythm for feedings and naps, drawing stars when a day matched the plan. Before leaving for work, he tapped the snow globe and kissed 3 soft foreheads as if sealing weatherproof letters. Margaret delivered heirloom rattles and instructions about linen care. Edward inspected car seats like contracts. They visited briefly, rarely at inconvenient hours, never long enough to help. Nora learned to cook one-handed, and to laugh even when laundromats ate socks. Ordinary days felt good, quiet, demanding, and full of small victories that stacked into something like safety. Then the floor shifted. Daniel collapsed at work, returned with scans and a word that redrew the calendar. Treatment started. Cycles, side effects, new rules that stole appetite, hair and strength. Nora learned to count progress in inches. An hour without nausea, a smile that reached his eyes, a lab result that offered a little grace. Margaret called daily about documents, especially powers of attorney and signatories, speaking in crisp clauses that avoided pain. Edward arrived once with a folder, referred to fiduciary duty and left before the tea had brewed. Neighbors carried casseroles. The children lined toy cars on the rug and whispered so their father could nap. At night, Daniel told Nora not to let certainty from anyone else define her choice. He said he had set safeguards with Thomas Reed if everything tipped. She asked what that meant. He touched the globe and promised she would understand when necessary. He died on a gray afternoon while Lily colored. Owen counted, and Sophie traced raindrops on the window. The house swallowed its own echo. At the funeral, wind-inverted umbrellas along the cemetery road. Margaret directed seating. Edward signed invoices. Condolences slid over Nora like rain on slate and left no warmth. She drove the children home early and tucked them in before the first casserole cooled. Morning brought addresses to handle, a vase of lilies and a voicemail about next steps. Days later, voices at the other end of the line turned from careful to cold. Margaret called to clarify expectations. Edward sent an email about capacity concerns and stability, phrases that translated into a plan she could not accept. The decision arrived with heavy weather. A truck rolled under the portico after dark, and two movers lifted boxes without looking at her. Rain hammered the stones so hard that puddles looked alive. Margaret stood near the threshold, umbrella angled like a scepter. Keys, she said, palm open. Nora asked for a week. The answer came as a blink. Now, Edward crossed his arms and watched as the crib mattress darkened in the headlights. A saucepan clanged across the steps. Toys rolled into water. A photograph glued itself, face down to the wall. Nora strapped the children into the old sedan while pleading for a conversation that never came. She lifted the snow globe from the mantel, set it on the passenger floor and counted the seconds between lightning and thunder like a useless ritual. The gate closed behind her with the finality of a dropped curtain. Their things glittered under the portico lights, as if the storm had turned ordinary life into a display case. Burlington took them in near midnight. She found a narrow apartment above a bakery where the hallway breathed yeast and damp laundry. The stair rail leaned, and the windows rattled whenever buses sighed at the curb. The landlord, dusted with flour, glanced at the sleeping children and quietly knocked $50 off the deposit. Nora bought a mop and a wobbling table from a thrift store, slid a coaster under one leg, and taped drawings to the refrigerator, until the room answered to their names. Dawn rose on cinnamon air. The baker slipped day-old rolls into a paper bag and waved from behind the glass. Miss Ellis across the hall offered Tuesday babysitting in exchange for company and stories. Money, however, left faster than it arrived. Diapers, transit passes, cough syrup, sneakers. One afternoon, Nora sold her wedding ring on Pearl Street for $1,200, sealed the bills in an envelope labeled rent, and stepped into cold air that stung the empty finger where the band had lived. She rebuilt Daniel's spreadsheets in a spiral notebook, added columns for groceries, bus fares, and hopeful plans, and kept receipts in a shoebox under the sink. The triplets adapted because affection never skipped a beat. They built forts from bakery boxes and named pigeons waddling along the sill. Mrs. Ellis taught Lily to measure flour for cookies, showed Owen how to fold boats, and gave Sophie a magnifying glass to inspect lint moons in window light. Nora worked nights filing charts at a clinic and days at a temp desk in a trust office, chewing gum to stay awake and reading forms until the words felt like weather. Margaret met her on Church Street and suggested alternatives with a voice that could frost windows. Edward emailed a list of guardianship options. Nora closed the message, wrote 3 lines: stay calm, keep records, protect them, and slid the page into the shoebox. Late, after the children slept, she poured tea, set a snow globe beside her, and ended a letter to Daniel with a sentence she understood. Thomas left a note about a box in Thomas's office. Morning at the Vermont Trust Foundation smelled like toner and lemon cleaner, a brisk mix that steadied nerves. The receptionist handed Nora Caldwell a badge and pointed her to a gray cubicle with pale rectangles where calendars once hung. She slid her bag under the desk, aligned 3 pens, and opened a login screen that blinked as if work could make grief behave. Temporary role, data indexing, 3 weeks to start. She needed every hour. Rent waited under the sugar jar, and diapers claimed whatever followed. Phones rang in even patterns. By 10, Nora had filed stacks of packets and learned which cabinet stuck on humid days. At 11, an older man with silver hair and a midnight blue tie paused at her desk. "You're Nora," he said. "Robert Klein. I worked with Daniel." "Daniel admired you," she said. "He said you could read numbers when others only counted them." Klein's eyes warmed. He was brave about saying the quiet parts. "I'm sorry. If anyone asks about archival accounts tied to your husband, tell me first. Curiosity can wear expensive shoes." After lunch, a partner in a checked jacket requested a box that didn't exist in the database, then suggested she try the basement. The elevator rattled like a grocery cart. Bins wore block letters and dust soft as flour. Folders bundled with twine shouldn't have lived below a compliance office. No box with that code. At 5, Burlington turned gray and wet. Above the bakery, she balanced a refurbished laptop on the wobbling table and coaxed it awake. A clinic tech had installed a simple VPN. She routed traffic through Montreal because it felt far enough to be quiet and close enough to be plausible. She started with public records in Daniel's project notes, letters that mentioned trust deeds, wires and meetings near the border. A paper map grew with arrows and dates. 2 city names repeated until they glowed. Montreal and Halifax. Whispers from nights before treatment stole the calendar. Property filings listed subsidiaries with pleasant abstractions. Vendor invoices appeared twice with small changes. A shell company with a Vermont postal drop resurfaced, where it shouldn't have lived. When the children slept, she cross-referenced routing numbers, matched bank formats, and searched for Daniel's favored phrasing. He had a voice on paper, clean and consistent. The Vances wrote like people storing ice, clipped, controlled, impatient. One line mentioned guardian stability and clarifying control, nearly the same language that had arrived in her inbox. Near midnight, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Vermont Exchange. Nora? A careful voice asked. Thomas Reed. I worked with Daniel. We met at a holiday thing, where cookies were worse than speeches. He told me to wait unless his parents pushed. I saw Margaret outside the probate court with counsel who bills by the ounce. That qualifies. Nora turned the globe with a finger. He mentioned a box, she said. Thomas exhaled. Don't say more on this line. Come early before clients. Haven Building, Lake Street, Suite 402. If anyone asks, you're dropping a condolence card. Bring one. The elevator sticks on 4 stairs. The call ended without a goodbye, which felt like courtesy. Sleep came in pieces. Cinnamon rose through the floor with the morning. At the office, Klein intercepted her near the copier with 2 paper cups. He trusted you, he said. Love is a ledger that doesn't accept forged entry. If you find documents that belong with you, keep them with you. He slid a small card across a list of public registries in a note. Keep originals. Nora signed out at noon, took an unpaid hour and walked to Lake Street through a mist that felt like breath. The Haven Building wore 1928 over the door in green bronze. Suite 402 smelled like paper and endings. Thomas opened before her second knock. He had a runner's build trimmed by time and eyes that dimmed and brightened quickly. I'm sorry, he said. That word keeps breaking. He closed the blinds halfway and pulled a leather portfolio from the bottom drawer. It creaked like a truthful hinge. Inside lay photocopies, a typed list in a flat key taped to cardstock. The tag read Bank Laurentian, Montreal, safe deposit 7. Daniel prepared this when his prognosis sharpened, Thomas said. He believed you would need proof more than comfort. Nora scanned the list. Dates marched beside amounts moving through entities with cheerful names that hid teeth. Entries bore initials that matched Edward's middle in a Montreal forwarding service the Vances used for seasonal shipments. Signatures looked layered. Invoices had duplicates marked draft, but filed as final. And fees vanished without a notation. Nothing shouted. Everything pointed. You trusted him, she said. Thomas nodded. He kept a wall between family influence and duty. Pressure was certain. It already found you. He handed her a thumb drive in an unmarked envelope. Encrypted copies. Use a machine you control. Keep your VPN. She slipped the key and the drive into a pocket she had stitched beneath her coat's lining. Because hope needs a place to live. Has anyone followed you? He asked. She pictured a gloved hand closing the estate mailbox at night when no mail was due. Maybe. Thomas lifted a legal pad. Document every contact. Time, date, words. If you need a witness, call me. If you need a door, my spare key sits in a red mug by the sink. Back home, she set the children with crayons and cookies and booted the laptop. The VPN is connected to Montreal. She covered the camera with a sticky note because ritual steadied nerves. A new local user, autofill disabled, history scrubbed. She opened provincial registries, compared Daniel's phrasing with entries, and traced references to trust beneficiaries that held only a surname she owned. Each hit drew a thread through the ledger. Faint alone, strong together. Messages chimed. Edward's subject line, clarity. Margaret's support. An unknown number that left no text. She let them sit. Lily asked whether the lighthouse inside the globe could ever run out of snow. Owen proposed making more from flour. Sophie pressed her ear to the laptop fan and said the machine had a tiny ocean. When dusk slid across the window, Nora opened her notebook and wrote a single line she had been carrying like a stone. Have you ever felt someone's betrayal cut deeper than you expected? Share your thoughts below. She underlined it twice, not to beg for attention but to mark the moment when fear stopped running and started building a case. The words belonged to a future where speaking aloud might guard someone else from weather that looked like her. She locked the portfolio in the oven because it was the heaviest metal box in reach and checked the door chain. The key to Montreal warmed her palm, a small weight that redrew her. She slid it under her pillow, not for magic but to remember through sleep that a door waited at the end of a train ride, a counter, a vault, a box. If she could reach it, the story might bend. If she proved what Daniel tried to leave visible, rain would be weather, not destiny. She believed it would. Rain followed Nora north before sunrise. A fine spray over bus windows turning signs to watercolor while Lake Champlain disappeared into mist. She kept the Montreal key inside her glove, pressing its small teeth into her palm whenever doubt tried to talk her out of the trip. Burlington thinned to barns under tarps and fields unrolling like wet cloth. A customs officer asked routine questions, glanced at child seats nested in a thrift bag, returned her passport, and waved the bus through. Nora leaned against the glass until the city rose out of the rain with shoulders of stone and glass. Downtown, the sidewalk smelled like espresso and damp limestone. She walked without hurry and stepped into a lobby where brass kept reflections honest. The bank greeted her with carpet that asked voices to behave. A clerk with shell earrings studied her coat and then her face. Safe deposit, she asked. Nora nodded and produced a license, the key and a patience she had earned. An attendant led her through a steel door into a quiet room. He checked her signature and slid a drawer free with a metal rod that clicked, set it on a felted table and left as if privacy were the most ordinary service in the world. Nora waited until the air settled. She lifted the lid. Paper waited like a patient witness. Ledgers on fixed stock, account summaries clipped to tabs, a manila envelope labeled in Daniel's careful hand. Her finger traced the ink as if touching his voice. The ledgers spoke in columns rather than adjectives. Deposits marched through related entities with cheerful names that hid sharp edges. Wires crossed borders at midnight and returned at opening bells. Then a summary sheet quieted everything else. Total assets held in accounts under Nora Caldwell, aggregated across custodial trust and insured instruments. $300,000. She reread the zeros until the number felt real. Relief and fury arrived together, because this fortune had lived a hand's breadth from a night when children wore rain-like clothing. She opened the manila envelope. A slender USB drive was taped to cardstock beside a folded letter. The letter, dated 2 months before his last hospital stay, carried Daniel's plain tone. He apologized for secrecy, described Margaret's talent for control, warned that someone would attempt to claim guardianship by attacking her capacity, and mapped what to show, when to show it, and to. He named Robert Klein as a first call and listed lawyers in Montreal who understood both money and menace. He finished with a line she could hear even now. Protect the children and let proof do the shouting. Nora pressed the drive against her palm, then slid it into the hidden pocket she had stitched inside her coat, while mending a tear. The seam received it like a vow. The letter went back into the envelope, which went back into the box. She returned the ledgers exactly as she found them, clips squared, corners aligned, fingerprints avoided by habit and care. Before pushing the drawer into its slot, she removed a photocopy of a single page, a ledger that tied a Vermont forwarding service to wires bearing Edward's middle initial. She crossed to a small cafe with fogged windows, bought a baguette to justify the chair, and wrote times in her notebook. Entry, drawer open, drawer closed, exit. She added one crisp line about the drive, in lining, above left pocket, stitches tight. The number on the summary page floated whenever she blinked, so she tied it to faces. Lily's fox backpack, Owen's shoebox that pretended to be a garage, Sophie's lamb with its worn ear. Money had always sounded like rent. Today it sounded like shelter, tuition, coats in the distance between safety and surrender. She called no one. She watched the door, the mirror behind the register, and the rainwater that collected along the curb like a slow river. She returned to the station and bought a ticket home. On board, she chose a seat that gave her sightlines to both the aisle and the driver's mirror. The border hour trudged past. A different officer asked where she had gone and why. Errands, she said, not untrue. The bus rolled off. Rain softened on the American side and became drizzle, then stubborn mist. Afternoon found her on Church Street under a sky the color of pencil graphite. The bakery exhaled cinnamon as if the building breathed kindness. Nora carried milk and apples toward the apartment step. Margaret Vance intercepted her near the crosswalk as though the meeting had been scripted. Curls sat severely against a collar that never wrinkled. We need to talk, Margaret said, skipping hello. Not today, Nora answered, stepping toward the stairs. Margaret matched her pace. Then listen. Some fights make children collateral. Leave town before this becomes one of them. Nora held the gaze that had ordered a crib mattress tossed into puddles. This town holds our doctor, our school, our neighbor with a spare key, and a bakery that feeds us when the math is ugly. She said, we're staying. Margaret's smile thinned. Sentiment pays nothing. Edward filed a petition this morning. Tomorrow you will sign for papers that say what you cannot afford to ignore. Judges prefer stability over drama. You can spare them the work by doing the sensible thing tonight. Nora thought of the drawer, the ledger's smudged line, and the drive hiding above her pocket. Proof felt like heat stitched into cloth. I heard your advice, she said. I chose differently. Margaret's voice cooled. Pride ruins mothers. Pride also makes courts unforgiving. The moment Nora stepped back, the moment waited for Nora to step back. She didn't. Nora turned toward the stairs and let silence be the last word. Inside, she latched the chain, set groceries on the counter, and found a note from Mrs. Ellis slid under the door. Call if needed, a sunflower sketched in the corner. She tucked the ledger copy into the oven beside the portfolio, because heavy metal makes a decent safe when nothing better exists. She boiled water for tea. She would forget to drink, and hugged 3 small bodies that smelled like sugar and rain. After dishes, she opened her notebook, dated a clean page, and wrote a single line that belonged to a future larger than fear. Have you ever uncovered a truth that changed everything? Drop your city in the comments. She underlined it once, not to beg for attention, but to prove the shape of courage. Night arrived early again, yet the air inside the little apartment felt different, less like a corridor and more like a room. The drive in her seam held light that could sing in a courtroom. She pressed the stitches with 2 fingers and thanked the earlier version of herself, who had sewn them in quiet preparation. Tomorrow she would call Klein from a payphone, copy the drive on a clean machine, and place appointments where Margaret could not shadow them. Nora set the key on the nightstand beside the snow globe and watched glitter drift over the lighthouse. She switched off the lamp and let the small room hold steady. Montreal's rain felt like Vermont looking back at her, a mirror held at arm's length. The vault air smelled faintly of oil and paper, the way libraries remember hands. When the figure settled in her mind, she pictured diapers stacked to the ceiling, a lawyer paid in full, and years in which worry could not dictate bedtime. On Church Street, the storm had chased her. Here it followed from a distance, taking notes. She promised Daniel silently that the proof would move before rumor. She promised the children that bread would never be rationed by weather again, and that no door would close without her choosing it ever again. The day after Montreal, Nora built a plan around silence and precision. She shared no details, only harmless schedules. At dawn, she left a note for Mrs. Ellis, set cinnamon rolls by the neighbor's door, and walked to the bus stop with a folded list tucked in her sock. She dialed the number Thomas had penciled. Novak Law, Montreal. Nora asked Claire. A direct line clicked. Claire heard the outline: vault, ledgers, tape drive, Margaret's warning, and replied with rails. Certify, duplicate, separate, document. You will not provoke, she said. You will prepare. We will let evidence walk. Nora memorized a mailing address and hung up, knowing the next hours had shape. She steadied herself and kept moving forward. By 9, she reached a public computer lab and logged into an account with no ties to home. She connected the VPN through Montreal, scanned pages, and placed them in an encrypted archive named with a sentence only Daniel would recognize. She uploaded copies to Claire's portal, printed receipts, and wiped history until the browser looked new. On the way back, she bought stamps and a manila envelope. Moving like an old movie kept nerves steady. At the trust office, Robert Klein met her by the copier with folders. He listened, thumbed a page, and nodded. We keep everything ethical and exact, he said. You will need a clean chronology. Every contact, every document, every unusual plate number. Judges listen differently when timelines speak. He slid a blank notebook across. Write in ink. She pocketed it like a small shield and returned to indexing file. That afternoon, she tested the Vance's attention. Among Daniel's files lived a deed to a narrow parcel near a rail spur. Using a shell company Thomas had suggested, she listed it quietly and accepted a modest offer from a storage operator who liked quick closing. Proceeds went into the company account, then were moved by a predictable transfer to a household fund. Nothing flashy, only motion a careful bookkeeper would notice. After school, the triplets came home scented with flower. Lily wore a paper crown. Owen carried library books. Sophie showed a worksheet of repeating triangles. Nora kept evening ordinary homework, soup, toothbrush negotiations. When small bodies finally settled, she returned to the table where maps, receipts, and copies formed an archipelago of paper. She called names from Robert's list, former employees who once kept warehouses moving and invoices tidy. The first went to voicemail, the second remembered nothing useful, and the third reached a retired shipping clerk near the border. Name's Whit Moran, he said. I stamped forms and watched storms. He recalled cartons traveling between a Burlington mailbox and a Canadian depot under labels that meant nothing, often just before auditors visited. Patterns, Whit repeated. Names, no. Papers, no. Patterns. Yeah. He offered to sketch a calendar from memory. Nora promised to relay the offer to counsel and hung up steadier. Patterns are the marrow of proof. Evening deepened until rain ran silver under street lamp. A sedan idled across from the bakery, headlights resting on the second-floor windows as if thinking. Nora lowered the blinds a sliver and memorized a dent above the left taillight. After 20 minutes, the car eased away, only to return near closing. Mrs. Ellis noticed too. That driver circled twice, she said in the hallway, passing scones in a tea towel. Write the plate if you can. I'll water plants and look without looking. Nora wrote the partial number in her notebook and set the page under the band. Morning arrived like a pale eraser. Nora packed lunches and slipped a note into each bag that said, "You are brave." The clinic faxed immunization charts after security questions. The school printed attendance records, a teacher's letter praising Lily's kindness, a counselor's comment about Owen's patience, and a line about Sophie's gift for patterns. She added copies to the tote and photographed the stack with a borrowed flip phone that stored almost nothing. At noon, she met Robert in a window booth. He reviewed the notes, drew 2 arrows between entries, and turned conjecture into linkage. Tone stays moderate, he said. Claire can raise the temperature when needed. You will answer plainly. Facts pull harder than fire. Before leaving, he added, systems act predictably when watched. Players get jumpy when watched back. Twilight painted the brick deeper. Lily read aloud while stirring batter. Owen measured sugar. Sophie whisked eggs with ceremonial rigor. After bedtime, Nora reviewed the hearing notice pinned by the band and practiced answers out loud. Address, employment, income, schedule, support, and emergency plan. She kept responses short enough to fit on a single breath. To steady nerves, she burned draft sticky notes and replaced them with clean cards labeled with single verbs. Listen, pause, breathe. Claire called at 8 with updates. A motion seeking temporary orders preserving custody, a request to seal sensitive financial records, and a proposed witness list, including Mrs. Ellis, a teacher, and possibly Robert. Expect charm first, then condescension, then pressure. Claire said. Answer in one sentence whenever possible. Look at the judge, not at them. Nora agreed, folded laundry and set 3 tiny socks in a row like punctuation marks. Near midnight, the sedan returned. A figure stepped out, photographed the building, and lingered at the mailbox. Flash reflected off the wet brick. Nora turned off the lamp and stood still as a coat rack until the engine faded. She recorded time, weather, dent, and direction of travel, then checked the oven where portfolio and copies waited. She relatched the chain, rested a hand on each sleeping child's shoulder, and let weariness land like gravity rather than fear. Dawn carried the truck noise and the smell of bread. Mail brought a packet heavy enough to suggest trouble. Inside sat the formal petition, citations underlining stability and capacity, and a date in firm black. Nora placed the packet under the band, squared the corners, and exhaled. She brewed coffee that tasted like determination and texted Claire. Served. Hearing date received, evidence organ, car still circling. Then she wrote a line at the bottom of her chronology. Because courage sometimes needs a doorway for others. What would you do to protect your family against all odds? Share below. That afternoon, she visited a notary, obtained certified copies, and shipped a sealed set to Claire's clerk by insured courier. She left a second set with Robert for safekeeping, and placed a third in a locker at the bus station behind a code only she could decode. On the way home, she detoured past the courthouse to study entrances, exits, in a hallway where witnesses wait. None of it looked dramatic. That helped. Evening softened. The sedan never appeared. She cooked pasta, listened to Lily narrate a lighthouse book, watched Owen build a bridge from popsicle sticks, and tied Sophie's hair with a ribbon that matched her worksheet. After dishes, she ironed a plain dress, polished shoes, and packed a tote with copies, snacks, crayons, water, tissues, and a blanket because courtrooms chill small hands while adults talk. When the apartment quieted, she lifted the snow globe, turned at once and watched glitter drift over the lighthouse Daniel had tapped every morning. "We are coming with proof," she whispered. The room answered with steady, ordinary silence. One shoved rain down Main Street until gutters ran like creeks and traffic lights bled red into puddles. Nora Caldwell strapped the guardianship packet with a rubber band and read every line twice. The Vance's alleged unfitness, unstable income, cramped apartment, grief, and a schedule that left children at risk. Language sounded careful, yet every sentence tilted against her. She copied the petition, sealed one set for Claire Novak, and slipped another beneath the oven pan beside the portfolio. Lightning stitched a crooked seam over Lake Champlain, and thunder rattled the kitchen glasses. She brewed coffee she would not finish, wiped the counter, and reached for Daniel's field jacket hanging by the door. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and hospital soap. Her thumb found a ridge inside the breast pocket, a hard edge where no seam should live. She turned the lining and discovered a tiny muslin envelope hand-stitched beneath a patch. A brass key slid into her palm, worn smooth, the head stamped Halifax Marina. On the reverse, someone had scratched a small petal, which she recognized as Daniel's fast sketch for Lily when bedtime demanded speed. Rain pressed harder. Nora tucked the key deep into her coat and left a note for Miss Ellis, who nodded once and promised to keep the children busy with stories and dough. Outside, wind combed water off eaves and chased her umbrella down the block. She rode the bus to the lakeshore, counting slips of paper in her pocket, the way sailors count knots. A marina office crouched against the weather, clapboards damp, flags knocking their halyards. The clerk studied the key, typed a number, and lowered his voice. "Seasonal slip, registered in Halifax. Contact Daniel Caldwell, vessel name Lily of the Wake. Slip 34, South Row. Careful on those planks." Wood flexed under her boots while spray blew sideways. The hull rocked against bumpers, modest lines gleaming beneath a film of rain. White letters had aged to cream along the stern. Lily of the Wake, Halifax. The key matched a padlock stamped with the same word. The hatch swung and groaned. Inside, lemon oil and diesel braided into a scent that felt like Daniel's tidiness, arguing with the lake. A mug nested in a sink, a wool blanket folded with ship's corners, a chart folded to a pencil route from Halifax to Burlington, across blue water scarred by wind. She braced herself, then knelt and unsnapped a canvas under berth curtain. A shallow compartment held a sealed plastic tub labeled with tape. Within lay a binder, 2 narrow notebooks, a waterproof envelope, and a slim USB drive clipped to paracord. She opened the binder first. Invoices for fuel, repairs, and Chandler purchases doubled as ledgers. Dates matching midnight transfers between cheerful shell companies, overseen by Vance accountants. Dock receipts showed signatories whose handwriting changed mid-month, while vendor numbers stayed identical. Customs declarations listed cartons addressed to a Burlington mailbox she knew belonged to a forwarding service the Vances favored. Margins bore Daniel's tidy notes. Mirror wire, Halifax, crew paid in cash by EV proxy, avoid audit windows. Nora turned to the notebook. Crew entries mentioned late unloads under poor light at a Canadian warehouse near the rail. One page held a clipped email with Edward's middle initial beside an instruction to route invoices through a numbered subsidiary. The waterproof envelope contained certified statements from a bank in Nova Scotia corroborating balances held in Nora's name and authorizations that bypassed Margaret entirely. A second drive gleamed like a fish scale in low light. Nora slid it into the secret seam she had stitched beside the first one from Montreal. 2 proofs riding silent above her pocket. She refolded the chart and paused at the margin where Daniel had scrawled a single line for himself. Lily first, then home. Her throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with storm air. She returned each item exactly as found. Corners square, clips aligned, fingerprints avoided by care and habit, then locked the hatch. Rain slashed sideways as she hurried past masts clacking like bone. The bus swallowed her into damp heat and carried her uphill through streets that shone like slate. Burlington smelled of bread and wet bark when she reached the bakery stairs. She fumbled the latch and pushed into the dim hallway. A white rectangle waited just inside her door, edges sodden, letters pressed so hard the strokes cut fibers. Drop the case or lose more. No signature, only a shadow carried by paper. She stood very still, then slid the note into the sink, struck a match and fed flame to the corner. Smoke curled. Ashes collapsed into a dark feather. She opened the window to let wet air comb the kitchen. A knock arrived almost immediately. Claire's voice moved through the hall speaker, clean and direct. "I received your packet. The petition leans on innuendo. We will answer with records, witnesses, and a motion to seal sensitive financials. Can you come first thing tomorrow?" Nora told her about the jacket, the marina, the second drive, and the threat. Claire inhaled steady and slow. We secure the chain of custody, notify opposing counsel regarding intimidation, and ask the court for protective orders. Tonight, add locks, call an investigator to document the hallway, and keep company if possible. Nora phoned a locksmith who came with a toolbox and crisp talk that filled the silence. Tumblers clicked, hinges accepted small adjustments, and a new deadbolt seated into fresh screws. An investigator followed, photographed the threshold, measured the ash, bagged the envelope, and noted footprints outside that trailed Rain toward the stairs. Mrs. Ellis brewed tea strong enough to hold a spoon upright, made jokes about storms that lose interest, and offered her couch. Nora thanked her and stayed home, because leaving felt like ceding ground she had just learned how to stand upon. Wind fretted the gutters all night. She checked the oven's safety twice and slept with her coat on a chair within reach. Morning glowed pewter. She sent the children to school with extra socks and a reminder that Mrs. Ellis would meet them at dismissal. A taxi carried her across town to Claire's office. Brick walls beaded with a paralegal logged both drives onto a dedicated workstation, verified hashes, and produced affidavits that read like engineering. Claire reviewed binder extracts, circled connections between invoices and wires, and pulled case law that treated intimidation as a lever courts dislike. They drafted petitions to establish 3 irrevocable trusts, one for Lily, one for Owen, one for Sophie, each with an independent trustee, disbursement schedules for housing, health, education, and ordinary life, and clauses forbidding third-party access. Emergency provisions triggered upon medical need or court order. Claire selected a trustee famous for boring prudence. Judges prefer boring when boring protects children, she said, filing electronically and hand-delivering copies anyway because printers fail at the worst moment. A clerk stamped receipts as thunder rolled over the lake like furniture dragged across an upstairs room. By afternoon, the courthouse steps gleamed, rinsed by a hard burst of rain. Claire's investigator texted photographs of a sedan with a dent above the left taillight, idling 2 blocks from the bakery, plates matching Nora's partial notes. The report slid into a folder labeled harassment beside the locksmith invoice, and images of the burned paper. These records give the judge something weighty to settle on, Claire said. Paper lands. Nora stopped by the school. Lily held a lighthouse drawing. Owen balanced a bridge made of popsicle sticks. Sophie wore a star sticker and recited a pattern from math. They hummed a rainy day song while she signed a form releasing attendance and counselor notes for court. Back home, she filed immunizations, pediatric charts, and teacher letters behind tabs, arranged outfits for the hearing, polished shoes, and packed crayons beside crackers and water in the tote. Inside, the snow globe caught the last gray light and sent glitter down through the tiny tower. She stood at the table and read her timeline aloud until the cadence settled into muscle memory. At the end, she set 3 envelopes on the counter, trust confirmations addressed to Lily Caldwell, Owen Caldwell, and Sophie Caldwell. She whispered each name and pressed a thumb to each seal. She checked the deadbolt once more, set the Halifax key beside the Montreal one on the nightstand, and lay down with calm she had not felt since the night before the funeral. A yacht, hidden in plain sight, a jacket seam, a drawer in a vault, a page that tied pretended invoices to a warehouse. Together they formed a bridge across water that had tried to drown her. Tomorrow she would meet Robert Klein to review chronology, then walk into court, with proof stitched into her coat, and 3 children held safe by trusts no petition could breach. Inside, resolve drew tight, like a knot. You check twice before you cast off. Rain blurred the lake and stitched the courthouse windows with silver threads. The elevator sighed open on the 2nd floor, where guardianship hearings waited behind frosted glass. Nora smoothed her dress, checked the tote copies, snacks, crayons, tissues, and felt the firm line of the stitched pocket against her ribs. Claire Novak met her at the corridor's end. "We speak simply," she said. Inside, benches creaked when people settled. The bailiff called. Docket 12, Vance petition for guardianship regarding minors Lily, Owen, and Sophie Caldwell. Judge Miriam Pike took the bench, composed, gray hair swept back. Her gaze moved across the counsel tables. Appearances, Claire Novak for Caldwell, Claire answered. Graham Holloway for petitioners Margaret and Edward Vance, said the other lawyer. The judge read the caption. Petition seeks temporary and permanent guardianship based on alleged instability and concerns regarding capacity. We will hear testimony. Petitioners, your first witness. Holloway called Margaret, pearl still, voice polished. She described a widow overwhelmed by bills, A cramped apartment above a bakery. Odd hours, children left with neighbors, and choices she presented as inevitable. Asked about that night, she chose weathered verbs. Things were moved. Circumstances required changes. Safety was paramount. Cross-examination stripped the shine. Mrs. Vance, how many days after Daniel Caldwell's funeral did movers arrive at your residence? Did you instruct Miss Caldwell to surrender the keys that evening? I did. Was it raining? Yes. Were the children present? Yes. Did you provide lodging for them that night? Silence lasted while the judge wrote, no. Objection to tone. Over. Edward followed. Posture military. Sentences clipped. He spoke of prudence and concern for long-term welfare. Referenced Nora's late-night computer use as though inquiry were a vice. And said the filing arose from duty rather than resentment. Claire asked who proposed the petition. He said he did. She asked whether he tried to locate or control accounts bearing Nora's name. I had no such knowledge. She slid a printed email chain requesting consolidation options through numbered intermediaries. He called it exploratory. The judge's pen stopped. Miss Ellis raised her right hand with a tremor, then found a steady rhythm. She told the court about thunder, headlights, a crib mattress soaking on stone, and Nora buckling 3 sleepy bodies into an old sedan, while asking for mercy that never came. She described Margaret's umbrella like a scepter, and Edward's folded arms. She explained the white rectangle, later pushed under Nora's door bearing a threat no neighbor could ignore. When Holloway tried to label her sentimental, she answered with times and small facts. The gates click at 9 m. The smell of wet wool. Robert Klein testified about Daniel's integrity at the trust office and Nora's meticulous indexing since taking a temporary role. He explained the difference between counting and understanding. Holloway suggested bias. Klein said, we benefit when order survives weather. The judge turned to Claire. Miss Novak, you indicated filings regarding finances. Yes, Your Honor. Proceed. Claire. Respondent moves to admit certified records from a Halifax institution and a chain of custody affidavit covering digital media recovered from secured locations maintained by the decedent. Exhibits A through F. The bailiff distributed binders. Paper whispered across oak. Holloway wrote, objection, surprise. Foundation, scope. Noted, the judge said. Weight will be determined after review. Claire walked the court through ledger entries mapping wires, dock receipts tying shipments to a Burlington mailbox used by petitioners, and account statements aggregating assets registered to Nora Caldwell. She pointed to certification stamps and notary seals, then opened a page that reordered the room. Total assets, she said. The figure read $300 million. A murmur rippled and faded under the bailiff's glance. Your Honor, Claire continued, the petition rests upon alleged instability. Respondents' assets, lawfully titled and meticulously documented, contradict that premise. More troubling, Exhibits E and F show transactions structured to obscure movement of funds connected to the decedent's holdings. Holloway asked for a recess to evaluate voluminous material. Judge Pike shook her head. We will proceed. You may. He tried to diminish the number as paper wealth beyond practical reach. Claire produced receipts showing cashier's checks issued last week to establish 3 children's trusts, with an independent trustee filed and verified. He challenged the chain of custody. She provided hash values calculated by an outside technician and a sworn statement documenting retrieval from a Halifax vessel, registered to Daniel Caldwell. Isn't it odd this fortune reveals itself only when your fitness is questioned? Objection, Claire said. Argumentative. Sustained, said the judge. Judge Pike looked toward Nora. Miss Caldwell, you may testify briefly. Describe your routines and support systems. Nora stood, palms dry, voice steady. She described mornings above the bakery, school schedules, pediatric visits, bedtime reading, Mrs. Ellis's help on Tuesdays, and indexing during limited hours. She referenced the trusts, the independent trustee, and the plan to keep housing, health, and education funded, without drama. Her words stayed plain. Holloway asked about Montreal. Nora answered that she traveled to safeguard documents Daniel prepared for her following instructions. He left when his illness sharpened the time. Borrowed money from friends? No. Intended to only if opportunity improves the children's lives and the court allows. She sat. Claire laid a palm flat on the table. Rain thickened beyond the windows until the sky looked like slate. Judge Pike addressed the petitioners. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, did you know of financial arrangements in Caldwell's name when you filed, Margaret said. We were uncertain, we suspected chaos. Edward said, no. Claire opened an exhibit showing his message, requesting consolidation of assets, bearing Nora's surname through numbered intermediaries. He called it exploratory. The room breathed differently after that. Holloway renewed his request for a recess. Denied. Claire submitted the investigator's report about the dented sedan, idling near Nora's building, the burned note, and the locksmith's invoice for new bolt. She placed weight upon the table until it did not move. The judge frowned, then looked toward the gallery where Mrs. Ellis sat with her cardigan buttoned correctly. Now, closing remarks were brief. Holloway invoked legacy and continuity, phrases that avoided the scene on the portico. Claire spoke about children who sleep through storms because their mother plans when fear wants noise, about evidence that meets the law's standard, and about petitions that misuse courts when conversation might suffice. Silence returned not as emptiness but as order. Judge Pike ruled from the bench on temporary orders. Petitioner's request is denied at this stage. I find the respondent has demonstrated stability through routine, community support, and robust financial safeguards. I am also concerned by credible evidence suggesting petitioners sought to obscure assets while questioning the respondent's capacity. Further proceedings will address those issues. For now, legal and physical custody remain with Miss Caldwell. Petitioners are admonished to refrain from contact outside scheduled communication and to preserve all records relevant to these accounts. The gavel touched wood lightly. Outside, rain weakened to a sift that silvered the steps. Mrs. Ellis squeezed Nora's hands. Klein managed a small smile. Claire packed the exhibits with the calm of someone who trusts process more than weather. The sky loosened from graphite toward pearl. Cars hissed along South Winoski Avenue. Nora watched the wet light and understood the tide had turned because proof, once found, knows how to stand. Today, Judge Miriam Pike returned to the bench with a marked stack and the composed gravity of someone who trusts documents more than declarations. The gallery quieted until the rain itself sounded respectful against the Burlington windows. On the petition of Margaret and Edward Vance for guardianship of minors Lily, Owen, and Sophie Caldwell, she said, the court denies the request. Legal and physical custody remain with Ms. Nora Caldwell. The petitioner's claims of instability are unsupported by credible evidence. Respondent demonstrates routine, community support, and robust, verified financial safeguards. Further, exhibits admitted today raise serious questions about petitioner's handling of assets connected to the dissident. Those issues are referred to the appropriate authorities for review. A breath moved through the room, as if the building exhaled. Nora kept still, palms open on her skirt, the stitched pocket against her ribs. A small, steady weight. She had prepared speeches, none were required. Proof had spoken, and the court had listened. The judge continued with the practical. Temporary orders converting to permanent custody were entered that afternoon. Contact would be confined to counsel. Intimidation, including the anonymous threat and the vehicle surveillance, would be addressed at a separate hearing. Preserve records, Judge Pike added. Let the paper do the talking. The gavel touched wood, light but final. Mrs. Ellis pressed a folded tissue into Nora's hand. Robert Klein inclined his head as if acknowledging an equation that had balanced at last. Claire Novak filed the ruling with the clerk and returned with a copy already stamped. Outside, rain softened to a fine veil that drifted across the steps and broke apart under shoes. Clouds separated just enough for a pale Vermont sun to test the stone. Claire closed her umbrella. We will courier certified copies to school, pediatric, and trustee offices today, she said. We will also notify opposing counsel regarding protective boundaries and preserve every chain of custody log. The referral is docketed. Mrs. Ellis squeezed Nora's arm. Home, she said, cookies and quiet. They walked to Church Street with the exhibits tucked under Claire's arm and the snow globe wrapped in a scarf inside Nora's tote. Inside the bakery, the owner pushed a paper bag of cinnamon rolls across the counter and told her the till could argue tomorrow. Lily, Owen, and Sophie sat at a corner table strewn with crayons. Nora knelt and told them the judge had listened. Does that mean we keep our house? Owen asked. It means we keep our home, she answered. Lily proposed 2 chapters. Sophie said the lighthouse would need extra snow. Claire outlined the next steps over coffee that steamed the glass. She would file the final entry, create a monitored email channel for scheduling, move to seal financial exhibits, and coordinate with investigators on shipping records, mailbox accounts, and the Halifax route. Trust confirmations had been posted. Disbursements for rent, food, health, and school could now run on rails that did not depend on anyone's temper. Rest, Claire said. Let the process carry weight for a while. Nora nodded and felt a tiredness that did not frighten her. The walk back to the apartment smelled like yeast, rain, and relief. A sunflower sticky note on the door in Mrs. Ellis's hand read, "Call if you need company. I am awake." Inside, Nora hung her coat, touched the seam where 2 slim drives rested, and set the stamped order on the table. She made 4 copies with the little printer Robert had loaned her. Lily taped one beside a drawing of a tower. Owen filed another in a folder labeled Shields. Sophie asked whether documents could hum like the globe when shaken. Nora turned the globe and watched white drift over the painted light. Daniel had tapped that glass every morning and promised a day they could live inside. She believed they had reached one. 3 envelopes from the trustee waited beneath the sugar jar. Each carried a name, a funding table, and a schedule, boring enough to soothe any judge. Housing, health, education, modest contingencies, and reporting requirements. Nora penciled a small list in the margin. Winter boots, laminated library cards, a Saturday train ride when leaves turned. The future no longer sounded like bravado. It sounded like errands were kept. Messages chimed. Claire sent the protective draft in a line, "Sleep first." Robert wrote, "Bring your notebook tomorrow. We should talk about making your desk permanent." Miss Ellis asked whether carrot soup counted as festive. Nora laughed. Because sometimes relief sounds exactly like soup. She cooked pasta and let the children set the table. They debated napkin folding with solemnity, then ate like people who trusted supper to appear tomorrow as well. After dishes, they built a fort from bakery boxes and read under it by flashlight until sentences softened into yawns. Nora tucked them in and watched the smooth rise and fall of 3 steady chests. The building's old pipes ticked. The night felt ordinary in the best way, wide enough to hold rest. At the table, she opened her notebook and wrote to Daniel as she had when grief needed a rail. She told him the judge had read the truth aloud. She told him the yacht's name had felt like a hand on her shoulder in weather she had not chosen. She told him the drives were safe, the accounts documented, and the trusts intentionally boring. Then she wrote a sentence for anyone who might someday need permission to stand where she had stood. "Have you ever fought for something you refused to lose? Tell us your story below." She underlined it once, not as marketing but as a marker for courage. Before bed, she stepped onto the landing and looked along the wet block. The suspicious sedan did not return. The bakery's neon sign blinked once and settled. She locked the new deadbolt, checked the oven safe, and slid the briefcase beneath the chair. The order dried under lamplight, edges curling as if even paper needed to exhale. She folded Daniel's jacket over the chair and rested 2 fingers against the seam where a key had slept, and where proof now waited, quiet and certain. Morning would bring forms to update with custody confirmed. A meeting with Robert about turning temporary work into a role that might outlast winter, and a call with the trustee to automate the boring parts of life so panic never again. Wrote the budget. Agencies would send letters. Accountants would answer questions. The Vances would speak only through counsel, and learn how slowly doors open when you have pushed the wrong ones. Nora did not script apologies for them. She scripted lunches, bus passes, dentist appointments, and a visit to the lake when clouds finally tore open and the water remembered how to glitter. She turned off the lamp. The room held its shape in streetlight. The lighthouse inside the globe stood where it always had, unbothered by storms painted around it. Nora lay down and felt steadiness arrive without performance. The pale sun would return tomorrow, and the next day filtered through cloud or bright across frost. Strength, she realized, rarely sounds like thunder. It sounds like receipts in order, shoes by the door, names on envelopes, and the quiet decision to keep what must be kept. Vermont, washed and tired, took a slow breath. So did she. The hallway smelled like dough and soap when Nora turned the key and guided the stroller up the last creaking step. Inside, the apartment held warmth she felt even before the lamp clicked. Shoes lined the entry like loyal dogs. A thrifted rug flattened the tilted floor. On the sill, 3 tiny pots held basil, dill, and a stubborn violet that refused to quit. She set the toad on the wobbling table, pressed the deadbolt, and listened to a quiet that felt earned rather than fragile. Lily, Owen, and Sophie dropped their backpacks and spun in the narrow space as if it were a meadow. Laughter bounced off plaster and came back brighter. The bakery below exhaled cinnamon. The radiator rattled a little song. The window showed Church Street rinsed clean. She took Daniel's jacket from the hook and draped it over the chair, then touched the hidden seam above the pocket where 2 slim drives rested. Proof lived there, silent, certain, and heavier than size. On the nightstand, the Halifax key lay beside the snow globe. brass dulled by thumbprints, teeth catching lamplight. She turned the globe once and glitter fell through the tiny lighthouse like patient weather. Supper became a ceremony that honored ordinary wind. Nora set 4 plates, straightened forks until they agreed, and slid the stamped order under the sugar jar where rent letters once waited. The table still wobbled, so she tucked a folded postcard under one leg and smiled when stillness held. Steam fogged the glass, then cleared to reveal a sky the color of thawed pewter. Outside, puddles carried tiny galaxies. Inside, sauce simmered, bread warmed, and 3 small voices practiced thank you without prompting. They ate, compared favorite chapters, planned a Saturday train ride, and voted for pancakes on Sunday. After the dishes, they built a fort from bakery boxes, books, and a sheet printed with suns. Flashlights threw constellations across cardboard. Lily narrated a lighthouse rescue with gull voices and rope creaks. Owen engineered a drawbridge from rulers and twine. Sophie stamped tickets, checked wrists, and declared every traveler cleared. Under the sheet, Nora watched them invent a world where storms listened to children. She let the room draw its own perimeter of safety, while the heater ticked and the refrigerator hummed. Outside, water ran along the curb like a song that knew the route home. When eyelids drooped and the fort sagged, she folded sheets, stacked boxes, and carried 3 drowsy bodies to bed with the practiced grace of a mother who had learned to move the weight of her life without waking it. Morning found Burlington soft around the edge. Snow that clung to curbs retreated into thin white rinds. Maple buckets appeared on neighborhood trees. Porch railings dripped. The lake brightened under a pale sun that seemed surprised to be trusted again. The market posted a chalk note promising first greens soon. The bus stop gathered backpacks and jokes. The bakery door breathed warm air scented with butter and coffee. Nora walked the children to school, waved at the crossing guard, and returned to a window bright with good work waiting. She sorted mail, filed receipts, and updated a calendar that now held dentist times and library days instead of court dates and crises. She opened her notebook and wrote a message to the man she loved. Thank you for the trust that outlived the weather. Your maps turned a maze into a road. I will keep records boring, breakfasts warm, and arguments brief. I will spend like a steward, not a victor, because safety is quieter than fireworks. Then she put down the pen and breathed the kind of breath that fills the whole chest. The trustee confirmed disbursements by afternoon. Rent is drafted automatically. A pediatric bill vanished from the ledger. Groceries moved through an account designed to feed bodies and relieve panic. Nora bought a better lamp for the reading corner and a second-hand bookshelf shaped like a boat. The triplets lined it with storybooks in a plastic gull. Owen insisted was a falcon. Mrs. Ellis delivered carrot soup in a stack of seed packets she swore would sprout on a sill if encouraged. They chose mint because tea sounded like spring. Letters arrived as well. The counselor proposed an after-school reading circle for Lily. The science teacher invited Owen to a Saturday project, building bridges from recycled wood. Sophie's math page came home with a star and a note about patterns that sing. Robert Klein emailed a single line, full-time offer prepared, ready when you are. Claire sent docket numbers in a calm river of dates that would move without a splash. Near dusk, Nora stepped outside. The air smelled like wet bark. Church bells counted. The sidewalk carried everything that once felt out of reach. Strollers, dogs, friends trading news, a kid doing wheelies with a grin he could not contain. She looked toward the water and saw the faintest glitter where clouds parted. A seam of light touching waves coded for She slipped the Halifax key onto a string and wore it against her collarbone. Not as treasure and not as a warning, but as a reminder there is always a way across. If you refuse to stop looking for a bridge. Night returned with gentler rain. After stories and floss in 3 solemn taps on the snow globe, the children slept. Nora sat at the table and let the quiet expand. She remembered the portico and the mattress soaking on stone, the gate's indifferent click, the envelope that demanded surrender. She remembered the bus north, the vault's felted table, the marina clerk's caution, the notebooks that told the truth in exact lines that did not break. She remembered a courtroom that chose documents over performance, a judge who asked better questions than any speech, and a friend who handed over a portfolio, because loyalty is a kind of math. Memory no longer hurt, it worked. It filed, measured, stamped, and carried. It had become muscle where it once was glass. She looked at 3 pairs of shoes by the door, at coats now hanging on hooks they installed that afternoon, at a drawing of a lighthouse taped beside a calendar studded with ordinary plans. Gratitude moved through her without apology. Pain had not vanished. It had been given a job. It checked locks, made lunches, balanced accounts, sharpened pencils, stood in lines, and learned to say no without anger. Strength, she decided rarely sounds like thunder. It sounds like receipts in order, names on envelopes, and the quiet certainty that comes from keeping promises to small people every single morning. The city settled. The lake darkened to ink. A freight horn moaned near the rail yard, and then softened into a silence that welcomed sleep. She turned off the lights, lifted the globe once more, and watched slow snow fall over the little tower that never flinched. When she set it down, the room still felt lighted. She climbed into bed, placed the key on the nightstand, and listened to 3 steady breaths from the next room. This is how you rebuild. One receipt at a time, one page filed, one laugh caught before it escapes, one kindness accepted without tally, one note to a neighbor, one window opened, one morning begun with the belief that survival is practice and dignity is design. If you are standing at your own gate in the rain, know that steadiness can be learned, proof can be found, and love can become a system that does not break when someone tries to shake it. If Nora's story moved you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The next story is even more shocking. Don't miss it.